Billionaire mother sees waitress feed his disabled son. A powerful gust of wind blew through the streets of downtown New York, carrying with it the typical sounds of the city, the honking horns, the chatter of pedestrians, and the clatter of nearby construction. But inside one of the city's most expensive restaurants, the atmosphere was remarkably calm. The muted sounds of soft jazz played in the background as guests chatted in hushed voices, their clinking glasses adding to the ambience of luxury. At a corner table, a man sat alone. His posture was perfect, as was his impeccable attire. A tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, a shiny watch that glittered under the restaurant's soft lights, and shoes that looked as though they had never touched a speck of dust. This man was not just any ordinary diner. He was Nathaniel Carter, one of the wealthiest men in the world, a billionaire with businesses spanning across industries. His wealth was practically immeasurable, and his reputation was a mix of admiration and fear. People either envied him or trembled at the thought of his influence. But tonight, Nathaniel wasn't thinking about his empire. He wasn't thinking about his companies or the billions he controlled. Tonight, he was focused on one thing, his son Luke. Luke sat across from him, looking anything but like a boy who was part of such high society. A boy of only 8. Luke had been born with a disability that left him unable to speak and dependent on others for nearly everything. He sat in a specialized chair, his small hands gripping the sides as his large brown eyes blinked slowly, staring at the sparkling glass of water in front of him. His disability was a heavy burden for Nathaniel to carry, but it was something he refused to speak of in public. He was a businessman, and to the outside world, his life was as polished as the suit he wore. But the reality of raising a son like Luke weighed heavily on him. Nathaniel was so lost in thought that he barely noticed the waitress approach their table. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with a warm, genuine smile. Her name tag read Emily, and she seemed to have a kindness about her that set her apart from the usual, more aloof servers in this upscale restaurant. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. How are you and your son doing tonight?" Emily asked, her tone respectful but not overbearing. Nathaniel blinked, snapping out of his trance. "Oh yes, we're fine. Thank you, Emily." His voice was deep, controlled, but there was a touch of exhaustion in it. Emily smiled again, her eyes flicking toward Luke, who was absent-mindedly tapping his fingers on the table. "Can I get you anything to start with? Perhaps some soup for your son?" she asked, already making a note on her pad. Luke's condition was so severe that it made dining out a challenge. He couldn't feed himself, and Nathaniel had long given up trying to teach him. Meals were always a struggle, and it took a team of nurses to ensure that Luke was properly cared for. But tonight, Nathaniel wanted something different. "No, thank you," Nathaniel said. "Just the usual. And, maybe something special for Luke." Emily hesitated for just a moment, but then she offered a gentle smile. "I have something in mind. Let me take care of it." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "All right, I'll leave it to you." As Emily walked away, Nathaniel turned his gaze back to Luke, his expression softening. The boy hadn't spoken a word, but Nathaniel knew his son's thoughts were always with him. The silence between them had become comfortable over the years, and Nathaniel knew that Luke understood more than anyone realized. It was just that, sometimes, communication was beyond reach. But what Nathaniel hadn't expected was for the waitress to return with something completely unexpected. When Emily reappeared, she wasn't carrying the usual tray of appetizers or drinks. Instead, she had a small bowl in her hands, a bowl of pureed vegetables and soft foods that looked like something a child would eat at a daycare. Nathaniel watched her approach with a raised eyebrow. "I thought Luke might like to try something different," Emily said, setting the bowl gently in front of him. "It's pureed, but I promise it tastes amazing. I've been making it for years for kids with similar conditions. It's been quite a hit." Luke blinked and stared at the bowl, his small face expressionless. But Emily wasn't done. She leaned over, her voice lowered. "Don't worry. He doesn't have to eat it right away, but it might help him feel more included. I know it's not easy to eat out when you're different." Nathaniel didn't know how to react. part of him was irritated by the audacity of a waitress offering unsolicited advice on how to care for his son. But another part of him felt something stir, something that hadn't been there for a long time. This young woman, Emily, had seen something in Luke that even the finest doctors and specialists hadn't noticed. The need for normalcy, the need for kindness. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Thank you. I appreciate it," he muttered, but he couldn't look her in the eye. Something about the way she'd spoken, as if she truly understood his son's pain, unsettled him. But then something strange happened. Emily didn't walk away. Instead, she lingered, her eyes soft as she watched Luke. Luke, for the first time all evening, slowly reached out and touched the bowl with his fingers, tracing the edges. He didn't move to eat it, but the fact that he was paying attention to it was a small miracle in itself. Nathaniel's chest tightened. Was it possible? Was it really happening? Emily took a step back, giving him space, but still watching with concern. Nathaniel felt a strange mix of gratitude and resentment toward her. She had no idea what it was like to raise a child like Luke. No idea what it meant to be constantly told that there was no hope, no cure. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him, offering a sliver of hope. Nathaniel's thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "Mr. Carter?" Emily asked softly, her tone now a little more hesitant. "I know this might sound strange, but sometimes when children are in difficult situations, there's something powerful in the simplest of gestures. Sometimes it's about connecting in the most basic way. Maybe Luke just needs someone who sees him as a child, not a diagnosis." Nathaniel froze. How could this girl, who knew nothing of his struggles, make such a profound observation? His lips parted to speak, but nothing came out. He was speechless, not because of the words themselves, but because they resonated so deeply with him. For years, he had been focused solely on fixing Luke, on curing him. But had he ever stopped to think about the most important thing? His son's soul. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning, and suddenly, his thoughts were racing. What if this wasn't just a fluke? What if Emily had tapped into something deeper? What if Luke, despite everything, could still experience life in a way that Nathaniel hadn't allowed him to? He hadn't considered this possibility before. Nathaniel's mind began to unravel. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. Was it possible that the solution to his son's struggles wasn't found in more treatments or more money, but in something simpler, something more human? A slight movement from Luke caught Nathaniel's attention. Luke had taken a spoonful of the pureed vegetables and was holding it to his mouth. His small, trembling hands brought the spoon closer, as if trying to understand what was happening. His lips parted, and then slowly, carefully, he took a bite. Nathaniel watched in disbelief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Emily saw the moment too, and her smile grew even wider. She had witnessed something miraculous, something small but powerful, and it was clear she understood the significance of it. Before Nathaniel could gather his thoughts, Emily gave a respectful nod and stepped away. But her gaze lingered for a moment longer, and in her eyes, Nathaniel saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. As the evening wore on, Nathaniel didn't notice the passing of time. His eyes were focused on Luke, who, for the first time in what felt like forever, seemed more engaged, more present. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than money, power, and success. Later that night, when they were about to leave, Nathaniel walked up to Emily, who was busy clearing a table. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Thank you," he said simply. Emily turned, startled by the sincerity in his words. "No need to thank me, Mr. Carter. I just did what anyone would do." But Nathaniel wasn't so sure. He had lived a life surrounded by power and influence, but it had never felt as real as it did in that moment. A small act of kindness had shifted something inside him, a perspective, a possibility. As he and Luke left the restaurant, Nathaniel couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if this was just the beginning? What if he could let go of his need for control and open himself up to something greater? What if he could finally heal his son, not with money, but with love? And somewhere, deep inside, Nathaniel felt that the journey had only just begun. But as he stepped into the cold New York night, one question lingered in his mind. Was he ready to change everything he had ever known? Only time would tell. Nathaniel stepped out of the restaurant, the brisk night air hitting him like a wave. His mind was still tangled in the events that had just unfolded inside. He could hear the rhythmic sound of his polished shoes clicking against the pavement, but the noise felt distant, muted, as though the world around him had slowed down. Luke, in his wheelchair beside him, was unusually quiet, his small fingers resting lightly on the armrests as he stared straight ahead. The boy's silence wasn't strange. It had been his constant companion for as long as Nathaniel could remember. But tonight it felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken shift that neither of them could fully grasp. Nathaniel had been so consumed by the need to fix Luke, to make him better, that he hadn't even considered the possibility of letting go, of letting someone else, someone like Emily, offer a fresh perspective. Emily. Her name echoed in his mind like a melody, soft but persistent. She had come to them, a simple waitress with no grand plans or agendas, and yet, in a matter of moments, she had done what no one else had. She had reached Luke in a way Nathaniel had never been able to. The thought gnawed at him as he pushed the wheelchair toward the waiting car, Luke's steady gaze never wavering from the path ahead. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around the handle, his thoughts racing. For years, he had poured everything he had into finding a cure, into building a world for Luke where his son's disability would be invisible. He had consulted the best doctors, flown across the world for treatments, thrown money at every possible solution. And yet, nothing had changed. Luke remained silent, distant, his condition as entrenched as ever. But tonight had been different. As they reached the car, the driver opened the door for them, but Nathaniel didn't move immediately. He lingered, his mind still spinning with possibilities. What if this wasn't the answer? What if Emily's kindness had just been a brief spark? But deep down, he knew it wasn't. There was something about the way she had seen Luke, really seen him, that struck a chord with Nathaniel. It was as though Emily had peeled back the layers of his son's condition and had simply treated him like a child, not a puzzle to be solved or a problem to be fixed. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt as though Luke had been acknowledged for who he truly was, not just as a boy with a disability. The driver noticed Nathaniel's hesitation, but said nothing. He had been with the family long enough to understand that when Nathaniel was deep in thought, it was best to remain quiet. Finally, with a deep breath, Nathaniel settled into the back seat, his gaze fixed out the window as the car began to move. Luke's presence beside him was comforting, but it also highlighted the growing realization that perhaps Nathaniel had been going about this all wrong. Maybe it wasn't about more treatments, more doctors, more money. Maybe it was about letting go. Letting go of the idea that he had to control every aspect of Luke's life. Letting go of the obsession with fixing what couldn't be fixed. And most of all, letting go of the walls he had built around himself. The city lights blurred outside the window as Nathaniel's thoughts deepened. Emily had mentioned the power of small gestures, the importance of connecting in ways that went beyond the surface. The simplest things, she had said, could sometimes be the most powerful. Nathaniel had never considered that before. In his world, power was measured in influence, in the ability to make things happen. But Emily's words had made him question everything. Had he been so focused on the mechanics of fixing Luke that he had missed the human element entirely? It wasn't until they arrived home that Nathaniel realized how much the evening had affected him. He helped Luke out of the car, guiding him up the stairs to the house. Their home was a sprawling mansion, filled with the finest furniture and art, a testament to Nathaniel's success. But as they walked through the grand entrance, a sense of emptiness lingered in the air. The vastness of the home felt cold, sterile, almost suffocating. This was the life Nathaniel had worked so hard to build, and yet it didn't feel like home. Not really. Luke wheeled himself toward the living room, his movements slow but purposeful. Nathaniel stood for a moment in the hallway, watching his son. There was something in the way Luke moved tonight that felt different, almost as if he was more aware, more present than usual. Nathaniel couldn't quite put his finger on it, But it was as if the walls between them had momentarily cracked open, just a little. A sliver of connection that had been missing for years. He walked into the living room and sat beside Luke, who had already positioned himself in front of the large window that overlooked the city. Luke's eyes were fixed on the skyline, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the lights outside. Nathaniel's heart tightened in his chest. He had always imagined that one day Luke would be able to speak, would be able to tell him what he thought about the world, what he wanted, what he needed. But now, as he watched his son sitting there in silence, he wondered if it was enough just to be present, to be there in the moment, without trying to force anything. For the first time, Nathaniel allowed himself to let go of the need for answers. He didn't have to fix Luke. He didn't have to make him normal. He simply needed to accept him. It was a thought so foreign, so alien to him, that it left him feeling vulnerable. But there was a strange kind of peace in that vulnerability, a peace that had eluded him for years. As the days passed, Nathaniel found himself reflecting on his encounter with Emily more and more. It wasn't just about the food she had brought for Luke or the way she had spoken to him. It was the way she had treated them, like a family, not a charity case. She hadn't looked at Luke with pity, but with compassion. She hadn't tried to fix him. She had simply been there, offering something so simple, so human, kindness. Nathaniel had tried to reach out to Emily a few times after that night, sending messages through the restaurant, but he hadn't received a response. He didn't know why he felt compelled to contact her. Perhaps it was because she had made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, or maybe it was because she had given him a glimpse of what was possible. He had been living in a world where everything could be bought, controlled, manipulated. But Emily had reminded him that there were things in life that no amount of money or power could change. One afternoon, as Nathaniel sat in his office, going over some reports, his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, his eyes widening when he saw the name. It was from Emily. Without hesitation, he picked up the phone and pressed it to his ear. Emily? His voice was urgent, but also hopeful. Mr. Carter. Emily's voice came through, calm and steady. I hope you're doing well. Hi. I've been thinking about you and Luke. I wanted to check in, see how things were going. Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. We're doing better, he said, his voice softer than usual. Better than I expected, actually. You've changed something. I don't know how to explain it, but what you said that night, it stayed with me. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Nathaniel wondered if he had said too much. But then Emily spoke, her tone warm and kind. I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes it's the smallest things that can make the biggest difference. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he wanted to ask her. But he wasn't sure how to begin. The truth was, Emily had opened his eyes to a world he had been blind to. A world of vulnerability, of acceptance, of human connection. And it terrified him. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Nathaniel admitted. About Luke, about me. And I'm not sure what the next step is, but I know I want to try something different. Maybe I've been too focused on fixing things, on making Luke better. But I think maybe it's time to just be with him, to just accept him for who he is. Emily's voice softened. That's a beautiful realization, Mr. Carter. It's not about fixing him. It's about loving him for who he is right now. Sometimes that's all we need. Nathaniel nodded, though he knew she couldn't see him. I think I'm starting to understand that now. Thank you, Emily. I don't know where this will lead, but I'm willing to try. The conversation ended with a promise to stay in touch, and as Nathaniel put the phone down, he felt something inside him shift. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had to control everything. He didn't have to fix the broken parts of his life. Maybe, just maybe, he could embrace the messiness, the imperfection, and find peace within it. And as the days went on, Nathaniel realized that the true journey had just begun. It wasn't about curing Luke or even understanding him fully. It was about being present, about showing up for the moments that mattered, and letting go of the rest. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to face it with an open heart. Nathaniel's days began to take on a new rhythm after that phone call with Emily. The tight grip he once had over his life seemed to loosen, replaced by a kind of tentative acceptance. Each day felt like a small step forward, and with every interaction with Luke, Nathaniel found himself more at ease, less consumed by the need to fix everything. It was like learning to breathe again after years of holding his breath, each inhale bringing in a quiet peace he hadn't known existed. Luke, for the first time in a long while, seemed to sense the shift in his father. The small moments, once dismissed or overlooked, now held meaning. The sound of Luke's gentle laughter filled the halls of the house in a way it hadn't before, the boy finding amusement in the simplest things. He wasn't speaking, not in the way Nathaniel had always hoped, but there was a change. The look in his eyes was more focused, more aware. The mansion, which had always felt cold and distant, began to feel like something else, something softer, more human. Perhaps it was because Nathaniel was no longer trying to force the space to be something it wasn't. He had filled the home with the best things money could buy: exquisite furniture, rare art pieces, intricate decorations. But these things hadn't made the house a home. It was the shift in his own heart that had begun to fill the space. The emptiness that had once gnawed at him seemed to fade, replaced by something more tangible, the feeling of presence, of being. One morning, as Nathaniel stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast for himself and Luke, his mind wandered back to the conversation with Emily. Her words, gentle yet profound, echoed in his mind as if she had imprinted them there. It's not about fixing him. It's about loving him for who he is right now. It was so simple, yet so revolutionary. He had spent so many years drowning in the idea of solving a problem, of making Luke whole, when the real answer was to simply be with him, to offer him love in its purest form. Nathaniel realized that the pursuit of perfection had never been the key to happiness. The key, it seemed, was embracing the imperfections, both in his son and in himself. As he set the breakfast table, he noticed Luke's gaze fixed on him, the boy's expression unreadable. But there was something in those eyes that Nathaniel couldn't ignore, a silent plea, perhaps, or maybe just a recognition of the new dynamic between them. Nathaniel smiled softly, placing a plate of food in front of his son. "Here you go, Luke," he said, his voice gentle, as though speaking to a delicate bird. Luke didn't respond with words, but his fingers moved toward the food, picking at it slowly, his attention on the task. Nathaniel sat across from him, watching as his son ate in quiet concentration. It wasn't the perfection he had once imagined. Luke wasn't sitting up straight, eating neatly, engaging in lively conversation. But it was something. It was real. It was enough. The days blended together, but each one brought with it a sense of quiet understanding. Nathaniel started taking time out of his busy schedule to spend more moments with Luke, not in the way he had before, with expectations of growth or change, but simply to be with him. They watched movies together, the kind Luke enjoyed, animated films with bright colors and simple plots. They went for walks in the garden, where Nathaniel pushed Luke's wheelchair along the winding paths, listening to the soft rustling of the leaves, feeling the sun on his face. These were the small moments that made the biggest difference. Luke's world, once so confined, began to expand, not because of any medical breakthrough, but because of the emotional space Nathaniel had allowed for it. But despite the subtle shift in his own life, Nathaniel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still missing. Something outside of his immediate world, something beyond his home and his son, was calling to him. It was a strange, restless feeling that had no clear source, but it was persistent. Perhaps it was the lingering thought of Emily, her kindness, her perspective. She had become a small yet significant part of his thoughts, and in the quiet moments when he wasn't distracted by the demands of his world, he wondered if there was more to their connection. He couldn't quite explain it, but Emily had become a symbol of something he hadn't realized he was searching for, a way of seeing the world that was untainted by the pressures of success, a way of existing that was grounded in something deeper than wealth or status. She didn't seem to need anything from him. She was simply herself. It was on one of those quiet afternoons, when the sun hung low in the sky and the air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, that Nathaniel received another unexpected message. It was from Emily. She had left a note in the voicemail, a simple invitation. "I'd like to talk more, if you're open to it. I'll be at the cafe tomorrow afternoon. No rush. Just whenever you're ready." The message lingered in his mind long after the voicemail had ended. Nathaniel had spent so many years building walls around himself, walls of success, of business, of achievement, that the idea of connecting with someone outside his carefully constructed world felt alien. But Emily's words were gentle, not demanding, and for the first time in years, he found himself intrigued, not just by the idea of talking to her, but by the possibility of seeing her again, of learning more about her. She was a part of a world he had long since abandoned, one where people connected simply because they wanted to, not because there was something to gain. The following afternoon, Nathaniel found himself at the cafe. The small, cozy spot was tucked away on a quiet street, far from the glitzy restaurants and lavish bars he was accustomed to. The atmosphere inside was warm, inviting, with mismatched chairs and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Nathaniel stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room, before his eyes landed on Emily sitting by the window, a book in her hands. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, looking like she belonged in that space, natural, unpretentious. He walked over to her, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of vulnerability creeping up on him. Emily looked up as he approached, her face lighting up with a soft smile. "Mr. Carter," she greeted him warmly. "I'm glad you came." Nathaniel nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "I'm glad you invited me," he said, his voice uncharacteristically tentative. "I didn't know if I should, if you still wanted to talk." "Of course," Emily replied, motioning to the empty seat across from her. "I think you've had a lot on your plate, and sometimes it's good to step outside of it all for a moment, don't you think?" Nathaniel took a seat, feeling the weight of her words settle in the space between them. She wasn't just talking about work or business. She was talking about life itself. And in that moment, he realized just how much he had been running from it, trying to outrun the pain of imperfection, the fear of failure, the constant need for control. But with Emily, none of that seemed to matter. She didn't need him to be anyone other than who he was. They spoke for hours, the conversation flowing easily between them. They talked about life, about their pasts, about what it meant to be truly present. Emily shared her experiences, her view of the world, a world where simple acts of kindness could create lasting change, where the pursuit of happiness wasn't about achieving success, but about connecting with others. Nathaniel listened deeply, as if every word she spoke was unraveling some part of him that had been knotted up for years. By the time they parted ways, Nathaniel felt lighter, freer than he had in a long time. Emily had given him something he hadn't known he needed, a glimpse of a world beyond the one he had built for himself. A world where human connection was the currency, where love and kindness weren't just ideals, but real, tangible things. She had shown him that there was more to life than the success he had worked so hard to achieve. And though Nathaniel couldn't yet put it all into words, he knew something profound had shifted within him. As he walked back to his car, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the streets, he felt the weight of his past lift just a little. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope, not in fixing his son, not in achieving the impossible, but in simply being. Just being. Nathaniel's return to his mansion that evening was quiet, as it often was now. The house, which had once been a cacophony of activity and expectations, now felt more like a sanctuary, a place where he could simply exist. The distance between him and the world outside had always been intentional, a fortress of wealth and influence to keep others at bay. But in the wake of his conversation with Emily, Nathaniel found himself questioning the life he had built. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the incessant need to fill the house with noise or to constantly prove something to anyone, least of all himself. As he entered the grand foyer, he paused for a moment, surveying the space. The chandeliers above, the marble floors beneath, the towering bookcases filled with volumes he had never taken the time to read. They all seemed somehow less important now. The mansion was, in many ways, a reflection of who he had been, a man obsessed with outward appearances, with success and control. But as the quiet hum of the house enveloped him, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't who he was anymore. Not truly. He had lived his life trying to control every aspect of it, his business, his wealth, his relationships. But now, for the first time, he realized that the only thing he could truly control was his own heart. In the days that followed his conversation with Emily, Nathaniel found himself restless. The life he had once considered perfect now felt hollow. He still loved Luke with all his heart, of course. But there was something deeper than that, a hunger for connection that had long been suppressed by the walls he had built around himself. Emily had shown him something he hadn't realized he was missing, the ability to connect with someone on a level that transcended money, status, or success. She had made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. Luke, as always, was the center of his world, but Nathaniel began to find himself more present with him in ways that didn't involve the pursuit of perfection. He didn't try to force Luke to speak, didn't demand more progress, didn't count the days until some miraculous breakthrough occurred. Instead, he spent time with Luke simply because he wanted to, because the moments they shared, however quiet or seemingly insignificant, were precious. Luke no longer felt like a project to be fixed. He was his son, and that was enough. One afternoon, as Nathaniel sat on the porch of his mansion, watching Luke play in the garden, his thoughts wandered back to Emily. He hadn't seen her since their conversation at the cafe, but she lingered in his mind, a constant presence that he couldn't ignore. Her warmth, her simplicity, her way of seeing the world, it was all so different from his own. Emily had managed to step outside of the noise of life, to find peace in the things that truly mattered. Nathaniel wondered what it would be like to live that way, to exist without constantly measuring success or striving for more. He realized, with a sense of quiet amazement, that he wanted to find out. He wanted to see the world through her eyes, to understand the kind of peace she had found in a life that seemed so far removed from his own. And if he was being honest with himself, he wanted to spend more time with her. Not out of obligation, not because of some need to fix something in his life, but because she made him feel like he could breathe again. Nathaniel didn't know where this connection with Emily would lead. He didn't even know if she felt the same way about him, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. It was something that had been missing from his life for far too long, a sense of emotional intimacy that didn't involve status or wealth, but simply human connection. That evening, after dinner with Luke, Nathaniel sat down at his desk and pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to send Emily a message. He didn't want to come across as too eager, but he also didn't want to let the opportunity slip by. Finally, he typed out a simple message. "I've been thinking about our conversation. I'd like to see you again if you're open to it." He paused before hitting send, his heart pounding in his chest. It felt like a small but significant step, like reaching out into the unknown. The old Nathaniel would have hesitated, would have overanalyzed every word, worried about how it would be perceived. But now, something had shifted within him. He hit send, leaned back in his chair, and waited. The response came quickly, almost too quickly. "I'd like that," Emily wrote. "When are you free?" Nathaniel felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a sweeping declaration of love or a dramatic proposal, but it was a step toward something new, something real. He typed out a reply, suggesting a day later that week, and before long, the plans were set. As the days passed, Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably changed within him. He was no longer the man who had chased after wealth and success with single-minded determination. He was no longer the man who saw his son as a project to be fixed or a problem to be solved. He had found a new perspective, one that allowed him to embrace the present, to find joy in the moments that mattered most, and to open himself up to the possibility of connection with others in ways he had never allowed before. The day of his meeting with Emily arrived, and Nathaniel felt a nervous excitement that was completely foreign to him. He had spent the morning getting ready, choosing a simple yet elegant outfit, something that felt more like who he was now, not who he had been in the past. He arrived at the cafe a little early, his hands slightly trembling as he entered. The same warmth from their previous meeting greeted him. And there, sitting by the window once again, was Emily. This time, she wore a soft, navy blue dress that complemented her gentle demeanor. Her smile, as she saw him enter, made his heart race in a way he hadn't expected. "Hello, Nathaniel," Emily greeted him, standing up to hug him lightly. The familiarity of the gesture made Nathaniel feel at ease, as though this was a simple, natural thing that had always been part of his life. "Hi, Emily," he replied, his voice low but warm. "It's good to see you again." They sat down, and once again, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about everything and nothing. Their hopes, their fears, the things they loved about life, and the things they wished they could change. Nathaniel found himself opening up in ways he never had before, sharing pieces of himself he had long kept hidden. He spoke about his struggles as a father, his feelings of guilt over Luke's condition, the sense of inadequacy that had plagued him for years. Emily listened attentively, never interrupting, always offering understanding. "I don't think I've ever told anyone that before," Nathaniel admitted, his voice a little rough. "I've always tried to do everything on my own. I thought if I could just fix Luke, if I could make things perfect, then maybe I would feel like I had control over my life. But I've realized that doesn't work. I can't fix everything. And that's hard to admit." Emily's expression softened, and she reached across the table to place a hand on his. "You don't have to fix everything," she said gently. "Sometimes the most important thing is just being there, being present. Your love for Luke, the way you're with him, it's enough. It's more than enough." Nathaniel looked at her, feeling a lump form in his throat. Her words, simple yet profound, hit him harder than anything else ever had. He had spent so many years striving for control, for perfection, but in that moment, he realized that true strength didn't come from control. It came from love. It came from showing up, from being vulnerable, from allowing himself to simply be. And in that vulnerability, he found freedom. He found peace. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I needed to hear that." Emily smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "You're welcome, Nathaniel." As they continued to talk, the hours seemed to slip away unnoticed. They shared a quiet meal, laughing at little anecdotes, enjoying each other's company in a way that felt both comfortable and exhilarating. Nathaniel found himself thinking that this was what he had been missing. Not the wealth, not the prestige, not the accolades. This connection, this simple, honest exchange of hearts, was what he had always needed. And as the evening drew to a close, and they said their goodbyes with a promise to meet again soon, Nathaniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't feel like he had to prove anything to anyone. He was simply Nathaniel, a man who had found something precious in the most unexpected of places, a friendship, a connection, and a love for life that had been waiting for him all along.